Hello, everyone. I'm Kaylin Walls, the president of the Louisville Forum, and welcome to our April 2025 program. The Louisville Forum programs typically meet at noon on the second Wednesday of every month here at Vincenzo's Restaurant in downtown Louisville. Everyone is welcome. Founded in 1984, the Louisville Forum is a nonpartisan, nonprofit public issues group. We host debates and conversations about contemporary and sometimes controversial public policy issues that impact the greater Louisville community. For more information on the Louisville Forum, our events, to join or to make a reservation, please visit LouisvilleForum.org. And now for today's program. From Frankfort to Louisville, the 2025 legislative session. This past legislative session included about 100 bills which were passed, from House Bill 1, which lowered state income tax, to Senate Bill 1, which established a film office here in Kentucky. This session also included several bills which were vetoed by Governor Beshear, including House Bill 495 on the ban on conversion therapy, which was ultimately overridden. Today, giving a recap of the 2025 legislative session, what passed, what didn't, and what this legislation means for Louisville, we have with us two members of our legislature. First, we have Senator David Yates from Kentucky Senate District 37. Senator Yates has been serving District 37 in this role since 2021. Prior to that, he served on Metro Council for 10 years, and he is a proud graduate of NKU Chase Law and a practicing attorney. Thank you for joining us, Senator Yates. And another familiar face, which, by the way, thank you for coming back, Senator Yates, is Representative Jason Nemes, who has been serving District 33 for several years, since 2017. Is that right?
That's right.
And Jason, thank you for coming back to the forum as well. He has been a member of the House of Reps since 2017, and he currently serves as the House Majority Whip. And in addition to our two legislators, we have with us our gracious moderator, Isaiah Kim Martinez, who is also a returner to the Louisville Forum. Last time as a panelist, this time he's going to be moderating our discussion for us today. And Isaiah is a reporter at WHAS. Prior to that, he did a lot of reporting in Tennessee, but he came to Louisville in June of 2021. In October of 23, he was named a senior reporter at WHAS. Can we get a round of applause for our three speakers here today? And again, we will be collecting audience questions and providing those to Isaiah, but from here, I'll let you take over. Thanks, Isaiah.
Thank you very much. Appreciate you guys all welcoming in again today. What a great day to be here. Obviously, we've had a couple weeks sort of to download everything. You know, the first thought when Lawrence had asked, hey, can you moderate this forum for an hour to talk about the legislative session? I said, how can we fit all that in an hour? But we're going to try our best. Some of the highlights, maybe areas that we didn't quite maybe meet the mark or meet the finish line. But regardless, we're going to have some pretty good conversations here today. I wanted to start with the question, how do we define the 2025 General Assembly? I find it really depends on who you ask, right? Yeah. Some might point to the reduction in the state's individual income tax, again, from 4 to 3.5%. Bipartisan moves like establishing Kentucky's first designated film office here in the state. Other moves like establishing or modernizing, the state's name, image, and likeness policies in college athletics. If you look at the headlines, I'm a media member, you'll see that ban on diversity, equity, and inclusion policies on college campuses. You'll also see requirements added for Medicaid and changes to services covered for Kentuckians, including the trans community. What about those efforts in Frankfort to mirror initiatives by President Donald Trump and Elon Musk? Where did those go? We're going to hopefully be able to touch on all of it, but I want to first turn to our lawmakers here and ask you guys the question, how do you define the 2025 General Assembly? Senator Yates, we'll start with you.
Yeah. Well, I've learned in any session, I can't lump it all together. It's kind of like bites of an elephant, just one bite at a time, just piece by piece, not even day by day. I will have to I'll maybe one morning where I'm jumping up and shaking my fists and screaming and upset, and then within a few minutes when a new bill's in front of us, I have to switch gears and I'm working in a bipartisan fashion to get something through or amended. So whenever somebody says, how was it? It was the good, the bad, and the ugly. And that's the truth of most sessions. I think we had some strong wins. I think, you look at even pieces of legislation. You look at 775, which has so many things. It was a Christmas tree of legislation where we put a lot of things that help Louisville that were very, very important to Louisville. And there were some things that were thrown in there that kind of made it hard to vote for it. And so it's hard to even say bill by bill because the way legislation is done nowadays, there's so many moving parts. I do like, and I think that we've done a good job this session of some discussions in the interim. Some of the things as far as what we think is going to affect Louisville and how we can move forward long term and make Louisville stand out. But then when you deal with the entire Commonwealth of Kentucky, which is our job as a state legislature, I think sometimes that we've taken some bad turns. I think that we've unfortunately tried to mirror some of the policies that I don't think are doing very well at the federal level. And we're going to feel some direct impacts in Kentucky. We are a receiver state is what we look at it. For every dollar that we give to the federal government, we get back about $2.42. And so when you see these dramatic cuts, Kentucky's going to feel it. When we talk about, throughout the United States, everybody's saying, well, how are the Medicaid or how is the CDC, how is all these things going to affect different states? It's going to affect Kentucky dramatically. And so I can cry and moan and argue, but what I have to do is figure out how to best make sure that we survive and that we do well. I get to be a co-chair of a nonprofit caucus. And for the first time in my service, 10 years on the council, a couple of terms as president, and now in the Senate, I'm really worried. I'm worried about how those things are going to survive because it is so important to the most vulnerable people. And so, there's a lot to go into it. So the session, I say there's good, the bad, and the ugly.
Sure. Yeah, very fair. Representative Nemes, how about you?
Yeah, I want to say, first of all, thank you to the Louisville Forum. This is an institution in this city that's really important. It brings voices to the table on both sides. I also want to thank Isaiah for hosting this. You're doing a great job, I think, as a reporter. My friend David Yates, we grew up together in the South End, so I'll try to be mean if that's what excites people, but we're good buddies, so it's not going to be easy to do, at least throw bombs at each other. I'll say this. I think this was the second best session in the history of Kentucky or at least the modern history of Kentucky for Louisville. The best session was in 2024, where we brought over $1 billion back home, $100 million in this area that we sit in the Central Business District. We're putting our money where our mouth is, and we understand that Louisville is the economic engine. And as Louisville goes, the state goes. You don't have to take it from me. Just look at what we've done. This session, we'll focus on this session, not just rely on what we did last session, because I want next session to be the best. But this session was, I think, the second best, only because it wasn't a budget session. And House Bill 775, that was my bill that Senator Yates had mentioned. We did a number of things in that bill, including we're going to have, you know where the Muhammad Ali Center is, right behind it, right before the 2008 economic downturn, we were going to have a museum plaza there. Well, that's going to happen now. We have the economic incentives to make sure that happens, so that area is going to be developed and make a new focal point for our city. That's kind of not a dilapidated area because Museum Row is there as well, but that's going to be a hub of our town. We also had we did for the first time in history, part of 775 was we said we've got this TIF for Yum. But there are areas in Yum that are just parking lot, in the Yum TIF, that are just parking lots. Let's try to do something innovative and allow a TIF within a TIF. Mm-hmm. So we're allowing a TIF within a TIF, and we've already got announcements that's going to happen over by the baseball park and other places to incentivize residential areas and commercial areas in that area. Also, as part of 775, we can now use industrial bonds for residential facilities, which will help us bring people back to the town. Our town, the Central Business District, Urban Services District, is losing population in droves. Our county is barely increasing in population only because of the suburbs, where 72% of our population live, by the way. Excuse me, 2/3 of our population live there, and 72% of our taxes are paid by people who live outside the watershed. But we need people here in the core. The core must be strong. Not only strong with businesses, not only strong with tourism and commercial places, but also strong with residential areas. And so we can now use industrial bonds for residential areas downtown. We also have Bourbon and Beyond and Louder Than Life. We've got a 10-year contract extension. I want to congratulate the mayor and David Beck is here as well, was instrumental in doing that. And we also, as part of 775, made sure that the state anteed up to ensure that that wonderful program, 3 days, I think, of programming, is going to stay right here in Louisville. So that's also in House Bill 775. As part of Julie Rocky Adams' Senate Bill 129, we have more incentives to build residential areas inside the water center. There are all kinds of other things that we've done. I'm sure we'll get to them, but I am very bullish on the General Assembly and how it's treating Louisville. I'm a member of the leadership in the majority party from Louisville, and I'm excited about what we're bringing back to my town, your town, and it's going to transform our place. And we need that transformation because cities all across the country are on their knees right now, and Louisville needs to get back up, and we are. So the two things that are most important, in my view, is one, safety and the perception of safety. I'm a Republican. As I say, I'm not in the business of praising Democrats, but this mayor has crime in his sights, and violent crime is down 40% this year. And we're trying to turn the corner on safety and the perception of safety. The second thing is economic development, and again, that's residential, that's commercial, that's tourism. So we're trying to do those things as well to make Louisville the best place that it can possibly be. So this session was the second best session in the history for Louisville's economy.
And you probably want to mention Rebecca Flyshaker's out
Yes.
there too as well. Part of that TIF and a TIF, and these are some of the things that we brought up in a forum not too long ago. So these things matter. We have the discussion because we really take it back at David. We look and try to incorporate things into action.
I appreciate you guys. Representative Nemes, I'm going to start with you. I'm glad you mentioned 775. Can you explain how these TIF carve-outs will work specifically within that arena TIF, the KFC Yum, like you were saying?
Yeah, so it's an innovative approach. We've never done it before in Kentucky. And so what we're doing is the Yum TIF is a broad, very broad TIF. And so within that are some areas that are underutilized. And so in order to incentivize hotels or residential construction in those or commercial in those underutilized areas, we've allowed them to put a hole in that TIF, if you will, in the Yum broader TIF to create its own TIF. Why? One, because we want that underutilized area within the TIF to grow itself. But two, if it does better, then the whole TIF will do better. That's the point of the TIF within a TIF.
I got to serve on the Arena Authority Board back when I was on the council and we first started doing that. And so it didn't make a lot of sense. Why would we want to shrink a TIF district to make it better? But it helped uplift everything and bring us out of junk bond status. So whenever we came and discussed, and it was a nonpartisan economic advisory group to come in and they explain how it can work. But in the event that there's not going to be incentives, nothing happens. And I think by taking something that is underutilized, like a parking lot or a vacant structure, and incentivizing it, well, then that encourages a growth around it, and it's almost contagious.
And the mayor, of course, lobbied for that bill as well. We know that economic development is so important on so many minds of Louisvillians. We have seen pictures of the city's downtown from, I think, 2000, and then you take a picture of the way it looks right now, 2025, and as far as high-rises, it's the same.
Well, and some of those high-rises are empty.
Right.
So it's even
we have
worse than the
Humana
pictures show.
that's vacating by the end of the year. We have KFC
Right.
that's moving its headquarters to Texas. I mean, these are things that people talk to me outside of the state about. How can Louisville bring big businesses here? Is 775 the answer? What about outside of that?
Well, obviously, 775 is part of it, and we don't only need to bring businesses here, we need to stop businesses from leaving.
Yeah.
We lost Papa John's, we lost Yum. These are big, big things. So we need to reverse course. Look, Rome wasn't built in a day. We're trying to get there. We're trying to get there with things like House Bill 775. We're also trying to get there with things like House Bill 1, which is reducing income taxes. And I know that's political. Politically, people have diverse opinions based on where you are politically. But House Bill 1, reducing our income tax, is, I think, a good thing for everybody. Let me make the case on that. So if you're an average Kentucky taxpayer, you've saved, since we've taken over in 2017, when our flat tax was 6%, now it's 3.5%, you save in your pocket $1,500. That's the average taxpayer. If you make more than that, obviously you've saved more. And that's good for that individual family, no doubt about that. That's a lot of tutoring, that's a lot of clothing, or whatever they need for their family. But who is it best for? It's best for Louisvillians. Why is it best for Louisvillians? Because we have the most income. So we always talk about we send a lot of money to Frankfort, and we do. We're getting more of that back. I want to get more of it. I know we can't be dollar for dollar because we have to help pay for the poverty in certain areas of Kentucky, or we also have poverty here in Louisville. But reducing the income tax is better for Louisville than any other place in Kentucky, because when you have more money in your pockets, you're spending more money at Vincenzo's. You're spending more money at the St. Matthew's Mall. You're able to hopefully afford housing. And so reducing the income tax is good for the Louisvillian and the Kentuckian, and also the businessman who's wanting to make the decision on where to go. Where are we losing these companies? We're losing them to Texas, and we're losing them to Florida and some to Indiana. We need to reverse that. And the way to reverse that is get the businessman what is important to him. Good arts, we've got them. Good parks, we've got them. Great income tax structure, and that's what we're getting.
And I think on the,
Well, I would like you to touch on that, Senator Yates, because there's this argument, right? You have a lot of Republicans who point to the tax code, reforming that as being the way to bring big developers here. We've heard argument from many Democrats saying, actually, what a lot of developers are really looking at is childcare access. What's the school system like? We talked about public safety. I mean, in your mind, what is the biggest player, reason why we're losing people, businesses, and ways we can flip that trend?
I feel like you're looking at my notes.
Only peaked once.
No, that's all right. So there's no easy scenario, and I'll tell you it's for me. Politicians, we hit bullet points right all the time. It's these three things, and the truth is, depending on who you're recruiting from and where, and what's important to them. I remember when we were trying so hard to get an expansion of Amazon and stuff, and everybody gave so much heck about bike lanes. Do you remember? Like it was, but that was one of the things that we thought that was on the checklist that for quality of life is the parks, the bike lanes, all things. And so I kind of laughed a little bit because it seemed like we were really just painting stripes on the side of the roads that were real safe. But I think mostly to say because that was attract a certain thing. And ultimately, we want to attract big businesses in, but we also want to make sure that we don't lose our smartest, best, and brightest too. And so much of that is quality of life. It's about being proud of where you're from. And so I worry, if you look at some of the anti-DEI legislation that was put forward and some of the other hate bills and stuff, I get a lot of young professionals saying, I can't do it. I couldn't live there. I couldn't do this. And I say, well, that's not all of us. That's not the way. Please don't paint Kentucky that way. I was just on spring break with my daughter, and I was talking to some other people in other areas, and they were asking, "What are you doing?" And so, of course, I'm very proud Kentucky and proud of Louisville, and so I almost take that as fighting words, and I have to go and explain all the positive that we are. But if you look at from income tax reduction, I believe that, and I have voted for some income tax reduction, but it's got to be a very diverse tax structure. I'm in a room with a lot of business people, people who understand that, and you want to make sure that you're protected depending on the ups and downs, and make sure you have income for the state in different ways, because even though everybody likes to say, hey, here's some money back in your pocket, we've got to be adults at the table and make sure that we're protected. And most of all, when we say we're protected, it's mostly the most vulnerable amongst us, because whenever that becomes shaky, so does the Commonwealth. And so there's no easy, simple plan. I think that it has to be a diverse tax structure. I think that we do a good job in that. But my worry is in the event that goes down to zero, and that sounds great, how much money it saves you, I promise you there will be other taxes. It will come up. And so I think we have to be very honest with our constituent base and saying, here's how much money you're still paying in. When you say the average person with income level of X, well, at the end of the day, let's break down the chart. And so that sometimes the nonpartisan economic advisory people will come in and say, this is really what the average household will be paying.
What does sales tax look like for certain things?
Yeah, and right now we've seen the little small hidden taxes that have come in place, things from your gym membership to different, just little places all through. So I think it's just really important that we have these open, honest conversations, that we have the debates, and that people understand what's happening. I do like the trigger, and that was one that me and Jason talked about when it very first came down. I was completely against it. And then we talked about a trigger mechanism that would only come in place to make sure that we weren't going to be Kansas. I do worry about how that could be manipulated by bonding capacity and other things to make sure we meet a trigger in the event that we don't have the money. So,
well, part of 775 is that there are triggers that aren't necessarily 0.5%, right? You could meet maybe a 0.1 or a 0.2, so that was a part of it as well.
Down to the 10th onto it. And so but again, that can also be, and most of us have ever worked on a budget, knows that you can kind of manipulate those triggers a little bit by how much you bond and how much you pay and different things like that. But at the end of the day, we got to make sure the people that are at the wheel, and I get to be in leadership in the minority party, are just being responsible. I don't want, I mean, it's tough when you sign your name behind a dotted line saying, I will always reduce down to zero, and this is what I'm going to do no matter what. And I won't say that. I won't do that because I'm always going to choose to do what's most responsible for the future of Louisville and the Commonwealth of Kentucky.
Isaiah, I got to respond.
Real quick, I want to switch gears
Well,
here.
it might not be so quick, but it's important.
1 minute.
Well, I need more than a minute. So
Minute and a half.
I'll go and you stop me when you think I'm going too long. So we haven't manipulated the budget with bonding or anything like that. We have the strongest budget reserve trust fund account, so rainy day fund that we've ever had. We have over 60 days. We spent it down to 45. We had 0 days when we took over in 2017. We no longer swipe funds. If you're an architect or if you're a nurse, they used to swipe your funds. We don't do that anymore. So we are being very responsible. The other states that are trying to reduce their taxes to zero, their income taxes to zero, they tax groceries at 9%. Their sales taxes are much higher than ours, and some of them tax pharmaceuticals. We do not tax our pharmaceuticals or groceries at all. And our sales tax has not increased. It's 6%. With respect to gym membership, you should pay taxes if you go to gym membership. That's a sales tax exemption. We've removed the exemption. That's what we've done there. I must say, with respect to the hate bills, there were no hate bills this session. There were none. They was misreported. I'll tell you this. Don't take it from me. University of Kentucky and the University of Louisville were both neutral on the DEI bill. What does that bill do? At core, it says it doesn't matter what color you are, what religion you are, what nationality you are, you're going to be treated the same. If you're a first-term college goer, you're going to get the same service as everybody else. Don't take it from me. The new University of Louisville president says this, Jerry Bradley, quote, the prohibitions of the bill, House Bill 4, do not apply to academic course content and instruction, academic research or creative works, freedom of speech, religious freedom, activities of student organizations, and activities that are required for institutional accreditations and others. There were no hate bills this session. That's a wrong statement.
Quick response.
Yeah. So the final product out of HB4 that came through was much better.
And that is the bill to ban
that is
DEI
the anti-DEI
public
legislation
universities.
that came through onto it. Last year, horrific. This year, the proposed bill, horrific. We went through, I talked to my cousin who came in who helps people with autism and developmental delays, and we talked about equity is that important to people with Down syndrome to be able to work in the workforce, to try to include people in there. So some of those things,
That's not covered.
They went through and moved that out of the proposed legislation.
That's not covered.
So we kept some of that's out of the final bill. When you file bills like that, and we're arguing bills like that, it sends a message on the university campus, talking to the students there that are working, that worry of that. The other thing is overturning the governor banned conversion therapy. We knew it was a practice that's barbaric, that is causing suicide and long-term problems with children. They took a veto and overrode the ban on conversion therapy. To me, I see that as hate legislation. We can go, I mean, there's several pieces like that.
Well, let's go through all of them.
Could I ask on that real quick?
With respect to conversion therapy.
Big picture.
With respect to conversion therapy.
I'll touch on that.
Okay, make sure we come back to it.
Big picture. I'll actually address that right now.
Good.
There is a question, I think, that both sides can answer. All sides can answer. Why was there such a focus, and we've heard this from people out in the community, why was there such a focus on a community here in Kentucky that represents less than 1% of the population?
Yeah, let me say this before I answer that question. I'm going to answer it directly. If you're a transgender person, I want happiness for you. I want you to be able to be successful. I want you to be able to have health care. I want you to be able to love on your family and accomplish all that you can accomplish. I love you, and I want you to be very successful. Let me tell you about what we did this session, and this is all we did this session. With respect to the transgender community, we said taxpayer dollars won't go to funding transition services. That's what we did. If you want to be transgender and have happiness, I want to support your happiness. But that's not on taxpayer dollars. That's what they're calling hate. I don't think taxpayers want to pay for that. I don't think taxpayers should have to pay for transition services. And I think the overwhelming majority of Republicans and Democrats agree with that. With respect to conversion therapy, all we did on conversion therapy is we said the governor cannot outlaw it. The licensing organizations, if you're a psychiatrist, your licensing organization, they can, and I hope they do outlaw it. I co-sponsored the bill to outlaw it a couple years ago, but it's not appropriate, and I don't think it's constitutional for the governor to do that. He's not the policymaker, and that's what we did. We said the governor can't outlaw it. That's all we did. If you're on one of those licensing boards, please get to work.
Senator Yates, quick response.
Yeah.
We know there's also a ban on Medicaid specifically covering some of these, like
That's
hormone
taxpayer
therapy.
funding. That's what I said.
Yep.
So it was an issue. There was no, they brought it up in committee that, hey, we want to make sure that no one else is going to have transitional therapy in jails. We want to make sure that this, and said, give me an example where it's happened. Well, it might happen. It could happen. They might start having sex changes in the jails. You don't know. They have scissors, whatever. Anything could happen. And I came in and I said, no, this is ridiculous. It is a distraction, and it keeps people focused on separation, division, and taking an attack on a marginalized community when we should be focusing on the things that matter most to Kentuckians, like the economic development, like the jobs, like the public safety, like the infrastructure, like protecting our water, like making sure that we're a better, more beautiful, more open, loving, compassionate state and city. No, it was distraction legislation for that purpose. So, and I don't, and whether, I don't think you were the sponsor in our
No, it was
area
not.
into it, but I argued that in committee. Give me an example where this has happened. There was no example. The response was, we want to make sure it doesn't happen. Not one time have we ever had somebody, they don't have the ability to be able to have a sex change in our prisons. That was misinformation that was sent out, and I got, 100 emails about it?
I believe they cited, not surgery specifically, but what was it, 67?
67 that are on
treatments.
hormone treatment. That's right.
Hormones.
But
Which,
that's the entire state.
at higher state, if a doctor
In
says,
jails, in
if a
prisons.
doctor says that it is reasonable and necessary under a medical condition, whether or not because you had before going to jail had a procedure or whatnot, if you have a prescription that is reasonable and necessary, in our jails or our prisons say we're not going to abide by that, we are setting the Commonwealth of Kentucky up for a lawsuit. You talk about Eighth Amendment violations and everything else, and to me, I thought it was ridiculous. We better politely pay out millions of dollars in defense and possibly settlements, or we focus on legislation that moves Kentucky forward. To me, it was a distraction, and it was done what I would call hate legislation, or you can call it distraction or anything else, and when we should have been focused on things that move us forward.
I love the debate
wanna
with my
get-
Dixie Highway friend. This was not brought up out of thin air. The governor's administration brought this up last summer. We didn't bring it up. The governor's administration did. And so it was a response to what the governor's action was. I think it was actually his corrections commissioner. And so this was not brought up out of thin air.
I want to bring up some questions that you all have sitting in the audience here. First, this is for both lawmakers. Most everyone agrees that affordable housing is important.
Yes.
But many do not want it in their neighborhoods. We're talking about Louisville specifically. How do we, quote, fix it?
Yeah, so what we're trying to do is it's a multifaceted approach. Representative John Hodgson is the leader on making sure that we don't oversaturate areas where the infrastructure is not present. And so House Bill 18, which was rolled into Senate Bill 129, says that if there is infrastructure, or roads, for example, that are red dog roads and they can't take a bunch of more cars and so forth, then we're not going to put an 800 apartment unit complex there. If it still can be put there, but it has to be voted on and approved by Metro Council and not just the Planning Commission. I think that's inherent is extremely worthy, and I think go talk to the people in the areas where they're oversaturating apartments, where they've got red dog roads, and see what they think about it. And you're not going to find one that disagrees. Now, but that's not enough, because you have to have housing, and where we have to have it is we have to have it where the infrastructure is there, where the services are there, where the buses run, and that is inside the Waterson. And it happens to be that we're losing a lot of population here, and so we need to get it. We need to infill again. Ms. Flashaker, the mayor, are doing a great job. I think we're getting ready to have an announcement on one of our buildings, office buildings, that are going to be renovated and made into residential areas. That's the kind of things that we're trying to do. The General Assembly is funding it. The council is funding it. But the housing is a very difficult thing. I will say this, and I'm going to be quiet. But affordable housing is extremely important at the low level, no doubt about that. I'm for that, no doubt. Let's do it. But it's most important for the nurse and for the mechanic and the teacher who is priced out of the market. They cannot buy a house. No one is building houses for them anymore. There's no more Camp Taylors and Lindens and Valley Stations. There's only Owl Creeks and Anchorages, and then big apartment complexes. I'm not against Owl Creeks and Anchorages and big apartment complexes, but I'm really for the housing for the working man, and that doesn't exist today.
Senator Yates.
Yeah, not an easy topic to be able to tackle, and if it was, we would have already tackled it. This has been back on my days in the Metro Council. I remember us going and studying best practices when we go to the GLI events and talk about, remember we went to Austin and figure out what works and what don't work and how we implement, and the not in my backyard thing is sentiment is not just here, it's everywhere. A little bit of our history is we know that the very strong of redlining, and we were likely one of the most segregated cities for a long time, enough where the Supreme Court has stepped in, and that's affected everything from our schools, the way busing is set up and whatnot. So it is important that we have housing everywhere, where people have the ability to live close to where they work and in different communities. I do think that infill of the downtown is a great answer. I think that helps. It makes sense because it transforms a lot of our vacant buildings, and we've put those incentives in place. In fact, I'm really excited. I think there may be a Starks project that may come to fruition that would be humongous. That would be great. I know there's some issues with the structure of the Humana building, but there's lots of opportunities to be able to do that, and it's going to take a focus. The reason you're seeing the higher level is because return on investment. If you're willing to build in certain areas, you may get $21. It may cost you $17 to $21 a square foot, but the return is going to be so much more than somewhere else where it still costs you similar to build, but you get less return. So in order to encourage developers and those to do it in areas everywhere, there has to be those incentives. And that's just the way the market, it won't do it by itself. But and I was on the housing task force on there, and we looked at it, and I love that some of the findings we were able to implement. But we have to have not just affordable, and it's defined by different people different ways, but you have to have middle class in there, because if you don't have affordable, the middle class gets priced out. But if you don't have middle class, then they wind up having to take the affordable housing for the most vulnerable. So you have to have housing at all levels, and we are so far behind. Some of the modular housing we're going to allow here in Kentucky, I think, will make a difference. Some of the zoning restrictions that have kind of loosened up in certain requirements, I think will make a difference. But you got to make sure that you have proper oversight, because for a lot of people, their home is their most valuable resource. And if you got to protect the integrity of that home, it's so important for people's retirement and really their overall security, especially what right now we're seeing a lot of vulnerability in the stock market and people's investments. And I think that we do owe it to those people that have invested in their home to make sure it maintains its equity.
And this is an area where Republicans and Democrats, I think, are largely simpatico. I would say that next session, I think, is going to be the housing session. And Representative Susan Witten is the point of the spear on this issue. She's leading the effort for us.
I want to switch to Senate Bill 89, which deals with water regulation. The question is, did Senate Bill 89 open the door on unsafe water in our state?
No, it would have. As it filed, it was an abomination. It passed the Senate, came over to the House. We stopped it dead in its tracks. Louisville Water Company drafted up an amendment. We got the amendment put on that, and once it was on that, Louisville Water Company became neutral, and we released the bill. We passed it. What's the purpose? The purpose is that the bureaucrats can't come into a farm and try to regulate somebody's ditch. That's what we're trying to do. So it's navigable waters. It needs to be navigable waters, or something that get into our water stream, and not just a ditch line that is on somebody's farm. That's what we tried to do. Louisville Water Company got their amendment on there. It was a hard no. We stopped it until the people who were pushing that bill met with them, and we got it on. They went neutral, and we passed the bill.
When it came through the Senate, this is one that I had real heartburn over. Had to go back and take a break and recompose myself. And it was. I mean, I think you said it right. I mean, it would, as passed, would have been horrific. If it would have been passed as written, would have been horrific for our community. I got calls from the bourbon industry, from the sportsmen, to everybody else. Are you really serious? You want to take away your ability to protect our water from pollution? Have y'all lost your mind? And that was the kind of the questions I'm getting from industry leaders. And so when it passed, I did talk to some other members of leadership, and I said, can we get the House to please fix this? And they did do a lot of changes. I do appreciate the water company's ability to step in and try to help write some. But remember but our duty, not just to the corporations, the companies, or to the people long term. And I do want to make sure that we always have that oversight. And I worry over and over, we're seeing a new trend as we're reducing ourselves down to the federal minimum requirements. And so we're saying, hey, we just want to leave to what the federal government requires. What that means is I don't want to have any other restrictions or oversight for Kentucky. So you have federal minimums. That's kind of like the Constitution. It's your basic into it. And then we get to pass different restrictions and oversights above and beyond that. So when everyone says, I just want to turn it over to the federal into it, that gives me some cause for pause. This was, I didn't believe was good legislation even as it finished. I think we could have handled it better. And I think there is some abuses sometimes as it relates to individual properties, but then you address those abuses. You hold those people accountable. And I think sometimes we become overly sweeping. And we'll see how 89 plays out, but I will say that I do appreciate the House keeping it from destroying our waterways completely, undermining our bourbon industry, and potentially destroying our beautiful Kentucky. That don't mean it's a good bill, it's just not as bad.
I have a question here, switching gears, that asks what is happening with public education. I want to add something to the end of that. We did see bills that ended up not passing, some that had to do with basically creating an avenue for split of school districts. JCPS seemed to have been on the mind. We had another one that talked about state takeover of individual schools that are deemed not to be performing. Ultimately, those didn't pass, but I'm told that everyone's sort of waiting on this superintendent and basically giving him a leash of maybe a year or two to turn things around, so to speak. And if not, we might see these bills return. What are your guys' thoughts on that as it relates to JCPS?
You're still waiting on the audit report too, is a big part of it. And to me, look, I'm all for oversight and accountability. I know that they've been through a lot of audits on there, but I do think it would be...
Those audits were internal audits. This is an external audit.
This is an external audit. And I do think that if that money and time is being spent, it would be, just from a business standpoint and oversight, it makes sense to get those numbers and findings back and then make a decision. And I believe that may be the consensus.
Yeah, I think that's right. There wasn't a bill to split JCPS or any districts this year. There was a bill that Representative Tipton filed that would allow people to leave and create independent school
Which
districts.
essentially would be something that JCPS would have to do. But it would be on Middletown, it would be on J-Town, it would be on
Ask the
these
Middletown
other,
person what they think will run to a new district.
I think we have Douglas Hill's mayor in the back. She's someone I talked to about this.
Yeah, so I would say this. So I think when the superintendent, I thought Marty Polio did a nice job. The problem is not the superintendent, the problem is the board. Marty Polio was the right person because of what he did at Doss. He came in at Doss and he had significant discipline problems, and he told our previous superintendent, don't apply the rules against me. I'm going to take control of this school. That's my home school where I grew up. I had two brothers that graduated from Doss. And he took control of Doss, and he got the superintendent's position, and I was excited about it. But then he was handcuffed too much by the board and also by the federal government too. They have some rules that they ought not have. And so it's not the superintendent, the board is the problem. But the superintendent can do a little bit better. For example, anytime anybody from JCPS comes to Frankfort, they never mention discipline, and they never mention academic performance. They don't mention it. It's not something they talk about. They talk about other important things, but secondary things. They don't talk about the two most important things. So I want to see who we're going to hire as a superintendent. I want the new superintendent to come in and wow everybody and say, we are going to focus on the two things that matter the most. And the board, to James Craig's credit and others' credit, the board has tried to focus on some of the discipline issues, or at least some of the firearms issues. Last year, 592 weapons were brought onto school property by students, and not one expulsion. But I wish they'd do better with that. But they have the magnetometers, which a lot of people fought against. I think it passed 4-3, and it's had a tremendous impact to reduce the amount of deadly weapons that our students are bringing on. So they're trying to do some things. But I'm always going to push them. If they do well, I'm going to want them to do well plus, a little bit better. They need to do better. Our reading scores are too low. Our discipline scores are ridiculous. When I talk to teachers, there were 122 teachers that retired 2 years ago from JCPS early, 23 of them from my district. I called them. Now, they retired early, so they didn't retire. They left too early. I asked them, why'd you leave? Nobody said pay. Not one of them. Not one. They said they weren't supported by the administration, or the number one reason was, I'm scared of the kids. There's no discipline. So we got to get those two things right. I hope the superintendent's the right thing, but if it's not, I'll guarantee you J-Town and Middletown will run to create their own new district.
See, that's the if it's not. See, that's sort of what we're seeing down the
We have a responsibility to make sure we get it right.
And one of the things I've learned to be, we don't have to reinvent the wheel. So we've seen a lot of big cities into it deal with similar problems. And what I have learned from us going and visiting, sometimes you actually get some of our money's worth on some of these little traveling things, but I nerd out on them. And I've learned it really has to do with social wraparound services for a lot of the children early on. I was a youth mentor for a little while, and in the event that there's a gap in there, they're not going to do well in school. If a child doesn't have a safe place to sleep or eat, they're probably not going to be real attentive in English class, especially if English is your second language. And so I did talk to Marty, and Marty, I knew him back when he was out picking up kids in his car to make sure they weren't going to be truant and bringing them to school, and really supported him in going above and beyond. But one of the things is that they will have the ability to have immediate, I guess I forgot what they're called, but they wear them around their neck, and it can interpret in real time what the teacher's saying. So if we have about 120 different languages in JCPS, and unlike a lot of states that have programs in place to help implement and put you into it, they get just thrown in JCPS and we say figure it out, which is a huge cost onto it. Yeah. But having some of that technology in place really will help those kids. So if they're in science class or something else, can help them maybe facilitate or math in real time. And we've seen that for years in other places. So I think if that money's not cut from the federal government, I think that will be a huge win. But also making sure where we fail our children in so many other aspects directly affects their ability to do well in school. And now I'm really, really nervous because we have about half of our children in Kentucky are on Medicare. I'm Medicaid. About half. You think about that, a third of Kentuckians. And so half of our children, 70% of our aging adults. And so if we see those cuts in there, Kentucky's going to feel it as much as anybody.
Isaiah, we
Can we
talked
talk
about the
about-
controversial thing, but there were a few things on education not controversial.
I was about to say the cell phone bill.
Yeah.
Yep, the cell phone's
That
one
was
of
a
the-
big one.
It's one of the
Urging
three.
local school districts. I know JCPS's board has been sort of vocal
There are
on
some
that.
schools at JCPS that have done it. Fern Creek High School has done it. I think
Banning cell phone use in the classroom.
in the
the
classroom,
option, yeah.
unless the teacher says
Unless
it's
it-
for
right,
instructional
yeah.
purposes.
Teacher's
and there's an
discretion.
emergency carve out, obviously. My son at Manual last year, they had a scare. It was not real, thankfully, but we were happy to be able to communicate with my kid. We made sure that that kind of thing is still in there. So we banned cell phone policy, or we said that school districts have to come up with a cell phone policy that includes a ban of using it in the school, in the classroom, unless it's for instructional purposes that the teacher says. That's one.
good.
Number two, and I think my hope was this is going to help Louisville. It'll help statewide, but help Louisville the most. Right now, every 3 years, we take the lowest, I think 10 or 20 schools, and we have Frankfort come in, and this is not like a Frankfort bad thing. It's people who are really good at helping turn around schools. They've had a really good track record, and so now we're going to, instead of identifying those schools every 3 years, it's every 1 year. The design there is my design is to get, and I didn't come up with a bill, but my hope is they will identify more JCPS schools so we can maybe double the number of schools that are getting intensive help from the state government. And my understanding is the local school board thinks that that's successful as well. And then the other thing is, if you're not up to snuff in reading by the end of the first grade, we will hold you back. The thing is, we've got to have you reading by third grade at level. So if you're if you're in K1 and you're not reading, then we're gonna be holding these kids back to get them on target. That is what they need to be successful. I know it's a tough approach, but it's what has to happen. And I'll also again commend the mayor on this Thrive by 5. We've put over $500,000 this year in the Thrive by 5 program for the mayor. That comes from our mineral taxes right here in Louisville. Louisville Council, I think, has put $5 million in it this year. And then they've raised another $1 million from private funds, and that's going to focus on 4-year-olds from families that make less than $90,000. So those kinds of things we're trying to do. We talk about all the controversial stuff and the sexy stuff. Those are nuts and bolts things that are improving our school district.
In the 4-year-old program, and I know Liz is here, we talked about because that only gets a lot of times young mothers and parents back to work sooner, but it also gets kids where they're reading and writing earlier too. So you would, if in the event we could implement that, then we would be holding back less and less children. So I think once you see the financial burden of having to do that again, maybe it'll make more sense as we come back in this next session about trying to do with the all-day preschool and early childhood.
I'd love to do some rapid fire. I want to cover as many of these as possible, so maybe 1-minute answers. Some of these are looking into the future. I got a couple questions here about TARC funding.
Yeah.
The city's transit system, in many ways, continues to struggle for a lot of people
It
here.
doesn't struggle. It's broken. It has far fewer riders.
How can
and
the
it costs
state
far much more.
specifically help
It's not
when
a
it comes
state,
to?
it's not a state responsibility. It's a city
But
responsibility.
can the state help?
Well, they're asking for money. I think we might be able to help. We'll see about that. It's going to see what the mayor's request.
Budget year? Yeah, maybe.
Well, the mayor comes up with his request. I'm not in business of negotiating against myself or with nobody. If the mayor makes a request, we'll consider it. But I do think that it needs to be the footprint at first needs to be truncated to cover the areas where we have more density. We are having far fewer riders, and it costs a lot more, which makes absolutely no sense. So TARC is broken. I understand that we've got the right people in place to fix it. I trust that they will fix it. But until they do, until they have a plan, they're not going to get $1 from the state. But if they have a plan and they make a request, that's something to be thoroughly considered.
Yes, looking at it, and we're not the only ones struggling with this too. So we've seen some of the similar programs, but you've seen some cities that implement these P3s, the public-private partnerships too, where there'll be certain corporate or companies or whatnot that really want to make sure they increase it. So they kind of work in partnership. I worked back in with Anthony White, and we had it set up where we got a line directly dedicated down to Riverport, and they had people who had come through recovery services once they had so many cleans and they were into it, and it put them right into work. And it was, I mean, it really was working. And then they cut the route. And to me, that doesn't makes a lot of sense. But I was thinking, well, this is something maybe we get Riverport to work with us on that, or we get different companies to be able to make sure that we do get people. Because honestly, that is one of our biggest hurdles, is that when we're trying to recruit the big business, we got to show that we have a ready, willing, and able workforce. And part of that is they have stable housing here, but also ways to get to work.
We talked about Louisville skyline not being added to or updated in decades.
Will be soon.
What about, will be soon?
Yeah, Museum Plaza.
What about Louisville's airport? There's some questions here about it being too small. It's impossible to grow as a city when your
Yep.
airport is lagging behind Cincinnati, Indianapolis.
Right.
Thoughts on
No
that?
doubt. So last
Can the
year-
state do anything
Yes.
there?
Well, we have. We've done more. We've done some, and I want to do more. So I think we gave them $5 million last year. It may have been 10. I think it was 5. To okay. To expand their so when you go in to get checked, you wait in line. We know how long that line is. So they're actually building out to make sure it's easier to get there.
And I've seen updates on the inside. It looks a lot better now.
And they're building out as well. So it's not just going to be on the inside. They're going to expand the footprint. And then I think they have a longer term approach to build more on it's not the runways, but the places where you walk to get to your gate, whatever that's called. Sorry.
Terminals.
Terminals. Thank you. I don't know. I'm getting old.
There you
I'm getting
go.
old.
Bipartisan help.
So
there.
I do know the federal government said they were going to put money in there. So senators, congressmen, if you're watching, it didn't make it to the final deadline. So, get it back in there. The money, I think it was $10 million they were going to put in. So the state has done some things. Louisville is the heart. Louisville is the heartbeat. This is the economic engine of Kentucky, and that airport needs to be great. And $5 million or $10 million each year was a start. We need to do more.
And we're a logistic hub. I mean, that is the future. Where we're located at is perfect for expansion. We don't have a coastal, but we are located in a way where you can get anywhere quickly, and that's why you see UPS and then FedEx in there. And so we've got to continue to expand on that, and especially if we're going to double down on our tourism, you've got to have the flights. Yep. And tourism is a great way not to increase taxes on there, because you have people investing in it. That's why the DWP and all that other things that we worked on, and me and Dave were just talking about, all the expansion there that we're going to have at the fairgrounds, and so we want to be able to draw on that tourism, whether it's from sports or entertainment or whatnot, but you've got to have the flights in and out of the city.
And I should have said, because he can't brag on himself, David Yates and Susan Witten were the 2 reasons we got the Danny Wimmer production thing done. So thank you for that, David.
Copper wire theft. Big issue here. We've seen our interstates, I-71 going towards Zorn Avenue, essentially dark once it gets, you reach dusk there. It passed. I have received a lot of feedback from people saying, okay, so you're heightening penalties for offenders, but at the end of the day, you're not regulating or making the sale of it at scrap yards illegal. And as long as there's a market, it's going to happen. Does the bill go far enough? I believe it was Senate Bill 64, I believe.
We hit that at the local level in the Metro Council. And that was one of I tackled hard and it was driving me nuts. And then I realized they were just going across the bridge, or they were going down to Clay County, or sometimes even as close as Bullitt in there once we had our locations. I don't know if there's an easy answer onto it. As far as I do think that sometimes the felony offenses on there does give rise to the ability for a detective to be able to go ahead and put it in and figure it out, because what we're finding is rings. It's not always just the drug addict who is breaking into it. Some of these are really sophisticated, and they're causing, they put in hundreds of thousands of dollars of damage onto it. And it wasn't just it was also the fiber optics that were put into place, the AT&T and everything else. So it got to the point that it was affecting our economic development. So I'm hoping that's another tool in the toolbox as we got to deter crime, especially as it affects our infrastructure, because we got to do our broadband expansion. We got to have these things in place to make Kentucky move forward. But you're right. There's some of the bad actors are some of these companies that are willfully neglectful of what they're taking in. We went after some of the pawn shops that had done that, and I felt like there was a good, we had beneficial on how long they had to hold that, turned over to the police. We've done that with the facial ID and some of those restrictions here in Louisville, but I think that something could be done statewide.
I want to talk about transparency a little bit. I know this is a hot topic, so let's try to keep it quick. Representative Nemes, you said that you are open to an avenue where people could see committee subs, last minute changes quicker. Because a lot of times the issue here, and this is a question, is these fast track processes, by the time the bill changes and updates, it's already passed through and people don't even know it's happening until it's passed.
Yeah, we need to do better. I mean, I'll take it on the chin. I know it gets quick. We go from, we have a truncated session where there's a deadline, and I'm making excuses. Yeah. We need to do better. If we have a rule where we have to send it out, if you have a committee sub, you have to send it out to all members of the committee. Mm-hmm. I think we should make that public. The thought is it might not be called. That's what I've been told when I've asked about it. But even if it's not called, I think it should be made publicly available.
Well, especially those bills that seemingly turn into something that is either a different bill or the focus changes. I mean, those are things.
I will say that most of the time, almost all the time, not all the time, I don't want to misspeak, but most of the time, it's adding a bill that's been out there for a long time. Most of them at the end of the session will have already been through another committee or even a House, and then you add it to a bill. Like we added House Bill 18, which had already passed the House and the Senate committee, into Senate Bill 129. So a lot of them have already been discussed, but not all of them, to be fair. And so, I mean, I don't see any reason why we don't do it. So I support that.
And sometimes it may be a bill that's getting added into a bill, but that bill that's being added into the bill had 2 amendments that changed the bill. Mm-hmm. And so, when you're dealing with, I guess the House had about 800 bills, I think they filed.
Yeah.
800, and then we had a few hundred.
They had more per capita than we had.
That's right. I'm an offender, I'll tell you, I know. And so there's a lot going on. And so it is hard. I had talked to Max about potentially just having them on our real time on our iPads. Even because when we're printing out documents and stuff, that way you could click on it and you can get a summary of the bill instead of just being a number, because I'm horrible with that. So the technology's there. I think we could definitely do better. Being part of a super minority, I get to be in leadership, so I get to go up to rules and do things like that. But I got to turn around and try to explain it to my whole caucus what it is. And so usually by the time I'm getting it in and explaining what's going on, we're voting on it. Mm-hmm. A couple bills that we have in, I think it was 90 it was still hot. I got a printout copy of it, and Julie was nice enough to come to the caucus and try to explain everything going on. But
that was the one that provided specific guidelines to when a doctor can perform an abortion in a medical emergency, and it sort of outlined it. And that was added to a freestanding
birthing center bill.
And it was literally, they did a committee, I think at 9, by 9:05 it was voted on, and it came back in, and this is something I had put in exceptions and all these things, and we'd argued for, but then I was worried, how does this language come in? And as an attorney, I'm a personal injury lawyer. I send things out to my experts all the time. What does this do? How does it help you? What is going on? I'm trying to send this out to people. I don't have any responses back. I think Cassie Chambers Armstrong was sending out to people she knew, and she said she had one saying this may be good, one this is probably going to make it worse. And so as we were like, what do we do? So a lot of us, we did pass on there, and then waited to try to get some information. And the governor was able to get, I guess, a little platform of some of the experts. And I think the intention was right. I think because of the lack of process, the way we rushed it, I don't think that we wrote it as well as we could have. And I'm worried about how that's going to turn out in litigation. I hope I'm wrong. I'm hoping that it does give information and understanding to doctors so they can better help women. But we've lost so many doctors because of the legislation we've passed who've said, I'm scared to operate in Kentucky. I'm scared to act. We got some of the young students that come down in the chambers and says, I'm here graduating from our university saying, I'm not going to live and work in Kentucky based on the legislation that you guys have passed. And so we can do better, and I think we will in next session.
Real quick,
90 is important.
Okay, real quick.
So how 90 came about was my bill. Birthing center bill was my bill. That was the underlying bill. And I also was in charge of the abortion. Look, the best thing politically is don't touch abortion. I mean, it gets crazy on both sides. People get completely emotional, and not. I'm not saying that's as a pejorative. It's something that means it's very important to people. I had no interest in getting into the abortion discussion. The head of Kentucky ACOG, Dr. Goldberg, called me this summer, and he said, Jason, did you hear what happened in Texas? Yeah, I did. It also happened in some other state. I don't remember the state. Yeah. And he said, it can happen here in Kentucky. I said, Doc, we've got a safety of the mother exception. He said, yeah, but nobody knows what it means. Doctors are fearful that they're going to have prosecutors look over their shoulder. And so I politically, the thing would have been to say, not it, buddy, go to somebody else. I said, Doc, there's no chance we can get this passed because it's about abortion. The right's going to throw a bunch of amendments on it. The left's going to throw a bunch of amendments on it, and it's going to die. But I said, is this worthy? And he said, yes, this will save Kentucky women. I said, get me a draft and let's see what we can do. He put the draft together. And then I got them because I know politics. You got to get something passed. I don't just need a good draft. I got Kentucky Right to Life on board with the Kentucky ACOG. They met together and they decided on the language. They got the bill good and it was done. And they were ready to roll. So then we got it done, and I'm proud of it. Look, the process wasn't perfect on this. By the way, they voted for it in committee the day before it passed the House and
my
passed the
committee.
Senate.
Yeah.
So they did vote for it the day before. Look, I'm not proud of the process, but I am proud of the result. We've got Kentucky women, and I asked Dr. Goldberg, I said, it's going to get really hot because both sides are going to scream and holler. But is this worthy? Will this save Kentucky women? And he said, yes, Jason, it will. And I said, then no matter what hell may come, let's get it done. And then I said, you can't buckle on me if you believe in this because it's going to get hot. I've been in the heat. I don't care about it, but you haven't. And he said, I won't buckle. This is the right thing to do. We did it, and I'm proud of it.
And I think right now,
Quickly, 'cause I
everybody,
wanna get to
everybody
closing
hopes
statements.
that is the case. I mean, like, there's absolutely right. I mean, I would hope that that is what everybody is pushing for. And had we been brought to it and we had the process going through, then we would have known. And we'll find out.
The
But
process would have spoiled the whole thing if you went through, because the right would have put 50 amendments on it, so would the left. Look, process is important. This result was more important.
Can I finish with sort of the elephant in the room? Do you have one last?
no, I was just saying that we see that right now a lot out there. People saying, hey, the end justifies the means. I'm a big proponent of due process.
I want to close with this, and you guys can loop this into your closing statements if you'd like. We only have a couple more minutes. The elephant in the room right now is we're living in society right now where we have the trade war, right? The tariffs, to tariff, not to tariff. We're sort of keeping up with it every day, heads on a swivel. Medicaid, what's going to happen federally? The Department of Education, where will Kentucky have to sort of fill in the gaps? $9 billion bourbon industry. I mean, where does this state go looking into next session to sort of fill in those gaps if those gaps need to be filled?
We're getting.
Go ahead, James.
I was saying right now we're getting updates, and I think the realest, most honest update I've gotten so far from a non-political economic advisor is I don't know. And there's some truth to that because you don't know where it's going to end, how hard it's going to impact us. We are so dependent. It's 46.4% of the entire revenue that we depend on in Kentucky comes from the federal government. I want to think about that. And so how these effects are huge to us. So even a 10 or 6 or whatever small percentage that may happen to, we rely so heavily on federal government in Kentucky that the smallest changes are going to dramatically impact us. So we have to be ready. And so, like Jason said, hey, I'll push this through during session when I'm arguing bills. I'll get very animated and we push, and I'm emotional over it. As soon as they pass or fail, my goal at that point is to make sure that Kentucky does well. At the end of the day, I never want, and same thing with the United States. I'd rather people I disagree with, at the end of the day, I want them to be right if their policies and procedures help the people that I represent, that help constituents. And so I'm hoping that the sky doesn't fall. We are expecting some impact. But the truest answer for people who have an alphabet behind their name and a lot more is we don't really know yet.
Yeah, tariffs, we don't know. I don't know. I know with respect to Medicaid, if they reduce it, it's going to hurt us. We pay about 10% of the Medicaid, and the federal government pays the rest. If they reduce that, it's going to hurt. We have Ken Fleming. We've created a Medicaid Oversight Advisory Board that Ken Fleming is going to head up from the House side. I don't know who from the Senate side. And so we need to make sure that we're trying to get our hands around that to protect Medicaid for those who need it most. I would also say, though, but there is a lot of excess in Medicaid. It's not good to say. What I just said is political. It will hurt me. It will damage me politically. But we have 14 counties where more than 60% of their population is utilizing, not eligible for, utilizing Medicaid. 14 counties, over 60% of the population. Another 44 counties with over 40% of their population utilizing. So that is 58 out of the 120 counties with 40% or more of their population utilizing Medicaid. That is not sustainable. It doesn't matter what the federal government does. That's not sustainable. The federal government reduces the reimbursement rate or increases it from us. The state's portion, that's devastating to us. So we are obviously talking very in close contact with our federal delegation to hopefully that doesn't happen. But we have some job. We got a job to do at home and make sure that we shore it up and for the people who it was designed for. Nobody wants it. We all want it to be there for those who are old, who are young, and who are infirm. And so we got to take care of home fires also.
And an uninsured population is not sustainable either, and we've seen that in Kentucky's past. And what we have right now, and we could get into some federal issues, but it directly affect us. But it's broken. Right now, you see, I mean, sometimes we incentivize the Walmarts and stuff to be able to pay people minimum wage, which is low because they're offset by housing that we pay for our tax dollars and then Medicaid and all these other things. This is a broken system. And so, unfortunately, where Kentucky sits is that when they cut dramatically without infill, our people may be hit the hardest.
Yeah.
I believe we are out of time.
Say
Thank you guys both so much.
Yes. Thank you, Representative Nemes, Senator Yates. Thank you also for stepping in. Senator Cassie Chambers Armstrong could not be with us, so Senator Yates was gracious enough to join us today. Thank you so much. And thank you, Isaiah, for moderating. On behalf of the Louisville Forum, thank you for attending. We'll be announcing our program for next month very soon, so be on the lookout. And everyone have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Appreciate it.